Namaste, and welcome to Vichaar Manthan on campus. My name is Bharti, and I am a part of the NHSF Central Zone campus team, and it gives me great pleasure to be your host this evening. For those of you who are new here, Vichaar Manthan on campus is our third Vichaar Manthan on campus, and as we like to call it, VMC, hosted by the NHSF UK and Vichaar Manthan. So to begin with, a little bit about both of our organizations here today. Vichaar Manthan, Vichaar meaning thought, and Manthan meaning to churn, is a voluntary organization who have been active for over 10 years. Their aim is to build a more cohesive British society by discussing relevant modern-day topics through a Hindu lens. Over the many years, they have hosted a vast array of discussions with different thought leaders from various different disciplines such as politics, literature, and science. VM have chapters across places such as London, Leicester, and Manchester, and they're in the process of establishing more chapters across the UK and globally. The National Hindu Students Forum, NHSF UK, are an organisation who represent Hindu students at universities across the UK. We have around 50 universities affiliated with us, and that number is ever growing. Our journey began back in 1991 when a group of Hindu students decided to set out and provide students a home away from home, where they could continue to explore their Hindu identity, cultivate key values, and grow as role models in society. Today, we've grown to do just that. We actively support over 4,000 students at university campuses to engage in activities such as seva, meditation, sports, and more. So what is VMC, you ask? VMC is a joint venture between both these organizations. VM bringing their intellectual discussions to university campuses. These are the hub of ideas and values and thoughts that are constantly being explored. And the purpose of our VMC today is to provide students the opportunity to do just that through a Hindu perspective. Our purpose today is to give you a greater understanding of the chosen topics and to answer any questions you may have, but most importantly, leave you with more questions to take to your family and friends to continue the discussion. This VMC today is brought to you by 6 of our university Hindu societies, which are Aston University, De Montfort University, Loughborough University, Nottingham Trent University, University of Northampton, and the University of Warwick. Over the past 6 months, our students have worked tremendously hard to bring everything together, and this evening today would not be possible without their dedication and hard work. So before we begin, a student from each university will share a quote about our topic that resonates with them.
Namaste everyone, my name is Nakshi and I'm a Sanskar coordinator from Aston Hindu Society. The highest education is that which does not merely give us information, but makes our life in harmony with all existence. Rabindranath Tagore.
Namaste, everyone. I'm Aditya, from the former president of Loughborough Hindu Society, and my quote for today is, the worst thing colonialism did was to cloud our view of the past, by Mr. Barack Obama.
Namaste, everyone. My name is Bhavya Mohan. I am the events coordinator at Northampton University. My quote is, cultivation of mind should be the ultimate goal of human existence. Thank you. This quote is from Dr. Ambedkar.
Namaste everyone, my name is Drew. I'm the president of Nottingham Trent Hindu Society. History belongs in the past, but understanding it is the duty of the present. Sashiji Tavo.
Namaste everyone, I'm Sean, co-president of Warwick Hindu Society. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Nelson Mandela.
Thank you to our students. That was certainly really inspiring for me to hear. And just to share my thoughts on the topic, as someone who was born in India and then brought up here, I would love to go back and trace my roots, find out the gems of Bharat and bring them back to today's society. So to start this journey this evening, we'll take you through a panel discussion where our chair and both our speakers will talk about various opinions, give you various perspectives and thoughts about our topic. And I know that as an audience, we're going to have burning questions for our speakers. So please make sure you pop them in the YouTube comment section and we'll do our best to answer that for you. Once we've done the Q&A session, our speakers and chair will then give their final remarks and bring the event to a close. So now, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Mayuri G. Parmaraman, our chair for the evening. Mayuri G is a graduate of politics, philosophy and ethics from the University of Warwick and an NHS alumni who served as National PR Coordinator. She's the founder of a business and communications consultancy, Palmer Advisory, and director of Conservative Friends of India, a Conservative Party group seeking to improve UK-India relations. Mayuri Ji has also been invited to advise the Indian Ministry of External Affairs on connecting the overseas Indian diaspora and is part of the 35 under 35 young leaders in UK-India relations by India Inc. Mayuri Ji, over to you.
Many thanks, Parthi Ji, and it's an absolute pleasure for me to be here today with everyone. Namaste and good evening to everyone who's listening. I'm delighted to be talking about this topic that's incredibly timely and exploring this central question, is the future of our learning in India's past? And to do that, we have got some wonderful speakers here today with us to explore this question. I'm sure we're going to get some differing and interesting perspectives from both. A brief introduction for both. We have with us Raviji Ladva. Raviji is a historian and a writer who specializes in Indian history, and in particular the Maratha Empire. He has a degree in business and religious studies, is currently studying for a master's at Aston in business management. He was also central as chair of the Birmingham Council of Faiths, where he promotes mutual understanding between the different religions within the city, and has done lots of work advising the local education authority on matters concerning the teaching of religious education. So it's wonderful to have you with us, Raviji, and to hear your perspective, certainly on the history of some of this topic. We're also incredibly fortunate to have Gushalji Mehra with us. He is the host of a wonderful podcast called Dharmic, which I'd encourage you all to check out after this. Based in Bombay, it covers topics from politics, arts and philosophy. He, in a sense, has got his leg in either camp, studied in Canada, is married to a Canadian, but obviously living in India. And so, has possibly quite an interesting perspective on this topic, both from the Indian lens, but actually through the diaspora lens too. One of his aims is to revive serious study of the Dharmic School of Philosophy as well. So welcome to you both, and thank you for being here with us. As you all know, we've just heard some wonderful quotes there on the power of education. And really, at any time in this, well, since records were there, we're living at a time when education is so prevalent that 86% of the world's population is literate. We live at a time when education is so democratized that we can learn from the palm of our hands, and indeed, we can benefit from the fact that actually education is no longer just considered a basic right, but actually governments have it upon them to provide it as a duty for most citizens in the world. Now, given that, we are still seeing that actually there are many different educational outcomes, no matter where you're based, whether it's in India or in the UK. India, obviously has many different educational challenges. Only, I think, 74% of the population literate over 15 years old. But certainly in the UK, depending on where you live, depending on your ethnicity, depending on your parents' educational levels, your outcomes are going to be very different. In fact, being a white boy in a deprived area is worse than being a Chinese or an Indian girl today. So, what's driving this? And is there something that we can look to in the past to start thinking about the educational systems we're using today in terms of the outcomes we want to drive in society? So I want to open the discussion with you, Raviji, going across. The title of this discussion is From Gurukuls to Grammar Schools, and I want to explore the concept of a Gurukul, because many of our listeners may not know what that system was and what it taught. So if I could open with you to say, what is a Gurukul, and can you tell us a little bit more about the philosophy of it and how it operated?
So thank you for having me first and foremost, and thank you to Kushalji for joining us as well. It's quite an honor to be with someone who's established and doing wonders on the internet for Hindu philosophy, in particular Charvaka philosophy. So I just want to get that out of the way. The Gurukul itself, it's made up of two words, Guru and then Kul, so the Guru's teacher. What kind of goes towards is a education system where kids from 5 onwards up to 25 in most cases would be enrolled and be taught from this one particular teacher or a group of teachers, depending on how big the school was. Obviously, we know the more famous ones like Nalanda, Dakshila, where up to 10,000 students would attend, learning an array of subjects, everything from sciences to mathematics to yoga, philosophy. So it almost had like a dual purpose. One was to educate, and the other was to problem solve. So depending on which empire or which dynasty was in charge and how much funding it had, if a Raja had a problem, the harvest has failed, we need to collect more water, he'd go to the Gurukul and put it to the relevant teachers. If the teachers couldn't solve it, they'd put it to the students, and they'd, as a collective, they would problem solve. And it performed that kind of dual function where it's passing on knowledge, but also solving societal issues.
That's great. And it sounds like, in a way, there's this approach, the Guru, a couple of things that were kind of, central to it working, whether that be the kind of more vocational nature of the training, the central role of the Guru-Shishya relationship. Kushalji, I know that you kind of talked a little bit about sort of best practices when we were speaking earlier about this. Like, what is it about the Gurukul system that you think worked so well and produced kind of, some of the greatest, I guess, thinking in early times in certainly in Indic history?
Well, first of all, I want to thank all of you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to interact with all of you. And actually, Ravi's being modest, and when it comes to history, Ravi's far better versed than I am. I'm just a philosophy guy. But yeah, to come back to the question of Gurukuls. So whenever we take up anything from the past, we have to be very careful, and we have to be very systematic in our analysis of that subject. So when I was mentioning offline about best practices, what I meant to say was there was something unique about the Gurukul system that and I would like to give a caveat here that my experience of getting educated, most of my education in my life was primarily in India. I did go to Canada, but that was just for a couple of years or so. But primarily, even my bachelor's degree and even later on my master's in philosophy, I did it in India. So for me, the way when I used to read about how the Gurukuls happened, there were some distinct things that I personally liked. And one was the way a student is selected. So when we talk about best practices, like, so what do we have in the current education system? The current education system really has, either you have I don't know how it works in the United Kingdom, but in India, you basically just go to a school, they take you in if you're in that particular area, and they let you in. So let's say I stay in X area of Mumbai, it's in that vicinity, I get in there. Or maybe in some schools which are like elite private schools, then it's a different thing. But in the Gurukul system, what I used to find very unique was that students are not just let in. What they did was they would actually do a personality evaluation of a student. And then the subjects that would be given to a child in a Gurukul system, were based on their personality and aptitude. Now that is something, so I don't want to go much more beyond that. So let's maybe focus, we can start by focusing on this best practice, which is, it is very good for the overall personality development of a child, in my opinion. So that is something we can definitely take from the past, where before we let us, I mean, you know how it is, right? With education today, we have standard subjects and everybody's taught everything. And you'll always have kids in the class, just cutting a sorry face, where I just don't know what's happening, so there's no interaction with the students. So that is something the Gurukul system actually had, which is kind of appreciable.
Absolutely, and I think that, in terms of the system itself, there's this element here, and I certainly think this today, as a grammar school girl, which was a selective. So in the UK we have different types of schools. State funded with the national curriculum. We have state funded academies and free schools where you can actually set your own curriculum to a certain extent, which I think we'll come to this later, but actually I imagine we could set up a Gurukul under that kind of system if we really wanted to. And then you have kind of your selective state-funded schools, which was a grammar school. Now, indeed, we were not taught to think. We were taught to write exams, and we were taught to do as much as was needed to kind of move on to the next stage. And I really think that the system that you are talking about, based on personality, encourages that sort of individuality of thought, the ability to critique, something that is perhaps missing Raviji and Kushalji. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, just on the back of what Kushal said, to have, selected students, it wasn't, based on any kind of economic or status within society. It was strictly based on this personality and aptitude. Again, I had the caveat that it changed depending on which empire was in power at that particular time in India. And I think that's a really critical part, because you could look at the last 1,000 years where Hindu society has completely collapsed and draw a completely different picture to the 1,000 years before that. And you can draw a completely different picture. And then within those 1,000 years, depending on where you are in India, you can draw and glean different lessons. But I think the essence of it was that we have decided that the best way to function is to help you be the best version of yourself. And in the Gurukul setting, the Guru's primary drive was to get the best out of you. Now, not necessarily to pass an exam, not necessarily to have the best marks, or to win all the medals. It was to be the best version of yourself. And ultimately, they kind of almost came to this understanding that another word, or another way of interpreting dharma is justice, and another kind of interpretation of adharma is injustice. So when you feel like you've been robbed of something, or when you feel like your resentment builds, and it creates this really toxic environment, where you start, the ego comes into it, as they say. But they found a way to countermand that, which is, okay, look, we've put all this in front of you from 0 to 25. Now you have a role to play within society, and we will find a function for you, depending on your aptitude. And ultimately, it's kind of going back to the basic principle. If someone's doing something good, let them do it. Or if you can't help them, get out of the way. So it's a very intricate and very well-developed system when it comes to education. A lot of hay is made about reading and writing and literacy, but you have to remember, a stonemason would have been the best stonemason. It would have been driving towards wanting to be the best stonemason, or the best, carpenter, driving towards to being the best carpenter. Reading and writing not necessarily factored into that. That comes much later with the arrival of a European mindset looking towards at what constitutes as education. So I think that's important to add at this stage regarding Gurukul.
Kushalji, sorry, were you about to come in there?
No. I'm good. I thought.
So absolutely. And it's interesting because it kind of makes me think about something that was a kind of sort of, I'll come back to why it made me think of that, but the Labour government in 1997, it's sort of on a platform of education. And its whole thing was, let's get 50% of all adults into higher education. Completely noble, excellent goal. But what's happened now is you've got a bunch of people with degrees not necessarily being able to match the jobs that are out there in society. And in a way, what you've just talked about there is having this kind of interesting, sort of quite rounded, if you want to be a stonemason, you go away and you be the best stonemason you can. Or if you want to, or then you can go away and actually develop another part of your learning. And it'll be interesting to see if we applied the Gurukul system today, would it give more focus on kind of some of those other elements of education, not just simply reading, writing, numeracy, which is kind of what we see. I mean, you picked up there on something really relevant to this discussion in terms of framing it, which was around, how this system changed as history sort of began to develop over the last 1,000 years. And what was the impact of kind of the various changes, the various empires that came through India, the various civilizational changes that happened? How did that impact the way that kind of this system operated?
So I'll give you the historical impact first, and then Kushal can come in and give you the philosophical changes that happened. The first thing that I want to say is that this kind of goes to the subject of history, why it's so important. A lot of people say, we want to go back to a time when, Hinduism was all powerful, all majestic and, kind of all shiny and new. But you have to remember that it was at that particular point that, Islamic conquest happened and toppled Hindus in particular quite conclusively is the word I'll say. Yes, there was resistance, and yes, there were other challenges, but there was a failure that we need to analyze and we need to learn, which can only be done through a historical lens. The example that I can give and draw on it is the siege of Dybal. Now, Dybal is now a city in Pakistan, but it was one of the main cities of Raja Dahir in the Sindh province when Muhammad bin Iqbal, I believe, a 17-year-old general dispatched by the Caliphate at the time to conquer it. Now, he laid siege to the town. He was there for a number of months, and in the time Raja Dahir was assembling his army. Now, depending on which source you believe, a group of Jain, Buddhist, or Hindu monks explained to him that you could end the siege by knocking the flagpole on the mandir over. So he trained his entire artillery onto the mandir and demolished it, and within a couple of hours, the entire city surrendered. They had plenty of food, they had plenty of warriors, they had plenty of everything. Now, what that meant is that Raja Dahir didn't have enough time to assemble his full army, so when they actually met at the Battle of Aror, Muhammad bin Salman won the battle. Now, the reason why the city surrendered is because they took it as a bad omen or a bad superstition. Now, what did the Muslim general do next? He slaughtered the entire town. There's a massive miscalculation in who they were going up against, who this person was about, and ultimately the miscalculation of how Indian armies are assembled. There's so many lessons from this one particular episode that you can only learn through a historical lens. And this particular event sets off a chain reaction for the next 1,000 years. Where let's take Takshila and Nalanda, for example. Argument's sake, optimistically there were 9 million books, and we can say conservatively we'll half it to 3.5 million books each, or 4 million books each. That was still more information in those libraries than the Library of Alexandria. And European historians harp on about how losing the Library of Alexandria during the Roman times was such a loss to European history. Now, Kushal is a Charvaka. I believe in Samkhya philosophy. We only have fragments left of our texts. Now, if you can imagine that everything that we have in Hinduism today, yoga, all the philosophies, all the histories, and that's only what we've managed to piece together so far, can you imagine what we've lost? So that's the historical context as to, some of the changes that underwent. And to be honest, we're still putting some of the puzzle back together again. It's a long process.
And Kushalji, your perspective on that in terms of the historical context.
Well, we have to understand when we're analyzing the past, right? We have to be very careful as to how we go about it. I have to repeat this because I'll give you an example of, let's say, the United States of America. Now, United States of America came up with a system of a republic. I mean, people often get confused between what is a democracy and what is a republic. People actually don't realize that The American system is actually a republic. It's not a democracy. It works well, whatever. But now in America or in many other Western nations, I mean, they had the same system, but they kept on expanding the moral arch. The first system was only the aristocrats had democratic rights. Then the democratic rights basically expanded to all men, only white men, obviously. Then from white men were added, okay, women, maybe we'll let you vote too. You see how the moral arch is expanding. It then ended up with everybody. You can take, but the system doesn't change. The only thing that the system changes is the moral arch expands. The moral arch, the people keep pushing as if, okay, hang on, if the system works, why is only that person participating in the system? Why am I not allowed? So when we look at something like the Gurukul, for example, now these are brutal facts that we need to accept that are part of our society. Were women getting equal access to education in the Gurukul system? I don't think so. There were multiple problems. Now we can always go to say one angle and say, no, but this kingdom allowed it. Look, we are doing a meta-analysis. Let's say there were 500 kingdoms in India, or there were 5 kingdoms in India. At that point of time, there were different areas in India. What was the overall scenario? That's what we should look at. Having said that, obviously lower castes are also not given access in many things in our system. And that's where, people need to realize I'm a Charvak, so I'm fundamentally opposed to many things in mainstream Hinduism. So but it still doesn't change the fact that Gurukul system, even though it was restricted to a certain type of population or populace, it was good. Now we circle back to the present time. We take what's there, and just like the Americans kept on expanding the moral arch, and they kept on allowing more and more people because they realized this system works. It's a pretty good system, this republic that we have. So what we should look at it is, from a philosophical perspective, is philosophy doesn't stay stagnated. Philosophy is also a subject that keeps expanding. I mean, the moral arch is a philosophical concept. It's not a historical concept in that sense, right? What is morality today? I mean, just think about it. I mean, we are consuming meat today. We know 100 years down the line when laboratory meat is going to be absolutely normal. Human beings at that time are going to look at us and say, these barbarians were actually keeping animals in factories and consuming them. The moral arch has expanded 100 years down the line. So the Gurukul system, we need to learn that from that. And then we need to apply it to our current moral arch.
Yeah. I mean, I hear you, but I mean, one of the things that I think is missing, given the context that Raviji just provided, that moral arch you're talking about specifically with the Republic, there is a written history there that hasn't been destroyed over thousands of years that allows us to connect the moral arch as society has progressed. Can the same thing be said for Indic history?
It actually can. In many ways it can. Look, as far as philosophy is concerned, I belong to the one darshan that has no books, basically. All we have is a Purva Paksh done by Astika Darshanas, and we have to take it with a grain of salt because we don't know, if it's the actual version. And the only book written is written in a format, in Sanskrit, there is a format called Vitanda, where basically you're taking the mickey out of the other person without stating your point of view. So that's only one book is left in Charvak, which is called Tattva Paplava Simha by Jairasi Bhatta. Now, even Jairasi Bhatta doesn't state the Charvak or Lokayatika point of view, but there is still enough material in our literature that we can take from, and we can draw a broader picture as to what it was. It's not like everything is gone. We have, let's say in philosophy, we have Sarva Darshan Sangraha from Madhava Vidyaranya. So basically covered all the main points of all the darshanas, right? Then whichever darshan you like, you can go deeper. And then it depends on, if you like Advaita, you can go into Brahma Sutra Bhashya. If you like Sankhya, like Ravi does, then you can go into the Sankhya Karika and stuff like that. It's not that it's not there. It's just that we don't even know what's available. So my answer to that would be, let us work with what we have at first, because my experience of interacting with majority of Hindus is they did not even know that a basic thing like Sarva Darshan Sangraha exists.
Raviji, you've been smiling. I wonder if you want to respond.
as someone, like, I don't just restrict myself just to Indian history. I like looking at what other people around the world have dealt with similar situations. Obviously, being brought up and raised in British schools, you learn about British history, European history, Romans, Vikings, Greeks, so on and so forth. And it's going back to limiting ourselves. The way Indian history was portrayed, whether it's internally or externally, it's incredibly limiting. And I have this conversation quite frequently where I have to explain to people that Hindus were visiting Greece and Rome just as much as Romans and Greeks were visiting India. And it's one of the things that came up quite recently was the concept of dowry. And I had to point out to someone that dowry isn't a Hindu practice, it's an Islamic practice that was incorporated into Hinduism. And they go, okay, so what's your evidence? I go, I'll give you a Greek reference. Arrian, Alexander the Great's chronicler, when he spent time in India, couldn't find a single reference to it. When Hun Sang in Raja Harsha's reign in northern India, he couldn't find any reference to it. So, we know that this is a relatively modern-ish kind of development, yet Hindus have taken it upon themselves to incorporate this into our daily practices. And if you can read some of the stories and some of the problems that it causes, there's no historical evidence, there's no historical kind of support structure for this, yet it continues to persist. And this is where something like the Gurukul can be very effective, where it starts weeding out some of these things that we've taken on, and it's got nothing to do with us. However, what I will say is that history requires a high level of emotional intelligence. There are things that will stay with you. There are things that will leave you shook, and there are things that will, affect your mental health quite substantively. There's a wonderful book. It's a chronicles Aboriginal history, and it's issues with colonialism. It's from massacres to mining, and I'll share this one story because it's never left me. And the Australian conquest or the British conquest, Australia essentially was a penal colony. All the criminals, all the rapists, all the worst parts of British society were sent to this island. Then overnight, literally, they were unleashed on the Aboriginal population. They used to play this game where they used to get Aboriginal babies, bury them neck deep, and then see how far they could kick the babies' heads off. And it was a game to them. Now, there are similar stories in Indian history about things happening to Indian people that are on this level. Now, you can choose to leave that in the past, or you can let it affect you, and all these things. Compared to philosophy, and Kushal will, I'm sure, push back, history is a lot harder. It does test your mental health in that regard when you hear some of these stories. Philosophy is dense, is what I would say. It takes time, it takes a lot of understanding to get through it. It's not the same as history in this regard. There are a number of stories that hopefully I'll get to share in this over the course of this kind of conversation. But that's just a juxtaposition between philosophy and history.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about this is that you talk about kind of having this it's almost kind of a memory, a chronicle, something that, and Kushaji, you're quite right. A lot of our history, a lot of our, in fact, the way that the Vedas have been developed over time, it's been through the spoken word. It's not necessarily been chronicled or written down. It's a completely different way of thinking, of retaining knowledge, I guess, over the years. But in a way, and I think in the context of Black Lives Matter today in the UK, you have this whole group of people who are trying to understand their what's going on with them today, and the only way they can do that is to understand their past, however horrific, however difficult, however painful. People are looking back and they're uncovering some of these awful stories to give them almost a place in history, a place in society. As a British Hindu Indian born here, I'm sure a lot of the listeners also have a similar sort of, where do I sit in that moral arch, or where do I sit in that kind of, I'm not saying history is a straight line at all, that would get us into a different discussion, but if where do I sit? And actually some of that context is super important.
I hear you, but here's the problem. It's a very fine line when we are drawing a narrative, right? Just think about it this way. What the biggest problem for me with the entire, I don't know, I think it was Faisal Sayyid Al-Muttar who came up with this word, oppression Olympics. Societies don't function really well when your zeitgeist is, I'm a victim, see how many bad things happen to me. I mean, just think about it. If you're living your life and you get up in the morning, you say, I'm a victim. Then you have your breakfast, you say, I'm a victim. Then for lunch, somebody else comes to you and says they're a victim. Then again, before going to sleep, somebody comes and calls you, they're a victim. That's a pretty bad way to live your life. I get it. Bad things have happened to everyone in their life, bad things have happened to us. Should we be told that? Absolutely, yes. But if your entire edifice is going to be, there's an expression in Hindi which is called "Hai main mar gaya." It's like it's a very Bollywoodish expression where you'll be like somebody, banging their chest with their hands, and they'll be like, "Hai main mar gaya." I'm dead. What am I gonna do? My life is destroyed. It's a pretty bad way to live your life. Like, at least I would not advise any young child to live their life like that. I'm not a victim. Did bad things happen to my ancestors? Yes. Did bad things happen to certain people within my society, done by people from my society? Yes. But my way of looking at life is, look, I'm not answerable for any of that. I answer for my deeds. Where I learned that lesson from? Hindu philosophy. There is no, collective sin here. I love that beautiful anecdote that Rajiv Malhotra actually shared in something he called the Hindu Good News, where the scene was basically he had this, I think it was a Jehovah's Witness, or I don't remember who it was, I guess a Christian missionary who came, have you met Jesus? He's like, I've not, but I would like to. And he invited that person inside. And then, they give you the good news of how Jesus has paid for your sins. And so Rajiv Malhotra came up with a brilliant answer, and where he said, do I have a Hindu good news? He's like, okay, share some good news with me. He's like, it doesn't matter if Eve committed the original sin. I'm a Hindu. I believe in karma. So only she paid for her sin. Mankind is not eternally damned. Let's celebrate and party. So what I'm trying to say is that while we need to have a historical perspective so that we don't make the same mistakes again, whether it's committed by outsiders on us or whether it's committed by ourselves on our own people, you need to have something positive to look forward to in your life. Otherwise, just look at it. Was the Gurukul system perfect? No. It excluded some people. So how are you going to sell that to people? Because somebody who looks at it from the victimhood, oppression Olympics, or victimology poker mindset, they're going to be like, oh, look, but these people were not allowing women here. Or look, the lower caste were not allowed there. And this is a problem, that is a problem. Then how do you sell something? My point is that who draws that line? Where is that grand narrative? If you want to take something from the past, mark my words, everything from the past will be tarnished. I mean, I think it was either today or day before yesterday, they canceled Abraham Lincoln. So, I mean, what else is left in life now?
Yes. I mean, cancel culture is, I feel like, a topic in its own right that we could probably spend hours on. But I mean, I guess...
Just on the cancel culture, I mean, it's relevant to Gurukul because in Hinduism, we have the concept of Prayashchit, the idea of that you can come back. If we buy in, as Hindus, if we buy into cancel culture, you're cutting yourself off from the idea that people can grow. And that's going to cause so many problems later down the line. And also it kind of flies in the face of reincarnation as well. I mean, if you want to speak it from a theological perspective, that you need to get these chances. But again, what I can do is I can posit this in a different question. My hypothesis is that Hindus really haven't learned from past mistakes in a way that we can guard ourselves from history repeating itself. And Asiko shall agreeing with me. So I haven't stepped on his toes just yet. But what I will say is this: if we haven't learned from the past, then do you think that as a civilization we could so the Guptas and Mauryas and so on, through the medieval period built up this huge wealth. Islam came and took it away. Vijayanagar Empire, the Marathas built up another huge amount of wealth. The British came and take it away. We are now in a phase where Hindus and Indians are rebuilding this wealth. Have we done anything to stop someone from taking it away again? do we have anything to stop anyone from taking it away? So there's that side of the argument. From a civilizational perspective, do we really want to put ourselves in a position where our entire way of life comes down onto the shoulders of a 15-year-old child in Maharashtra? And if this 15-year-old child makes one wrong mistake over the course of his life, India doesn't go past the Narmada River. And it's confined to the south of India in small enclaves. Now, these are some of the questions and perspectives from history that, at least I've kind of gleaned from my interpretation of history and my reading. And when I see decision makers around the world for Hindus completely ignoring history and thinking that, oh, this time it will be different, I kind of ascribe it the way what queuing is to British people, taking a rake to the face is to Hindus, where we completely ignore our history, completely ignore the pain and suffering that our ancestors went through and those lessons learned. And we continue to think that, history will somehow be different this time. It's the definition of insanity.
And what's that? I think you're right. I have to agree with you. I mean, I think though, at the same time, if we think about the learnings that we make to change the way that we're going to behave, is Gurukul at the center of that, is taking those best practices that we were speaking about earlier, going to change how people think and interact about the world. They think about India, they think about Hinduism.
Your voice broke in the end. Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
So my question was that if we think that we're saying that we need to learn from the past to avoid past mistakes, is it Gurukul system and the best practices from that going to allow us to do that?
Oh, definitely. Like I gave you one example. So let's take another example that actually could help India. So I'm talking about India right now because you have to understand I live in this country, so my worldview is primarily influenced by India and my experiences in India. Now, another thing that I would love to have implemented in India as something that we could learn a lot from the Gurukul system is, very interestingly, I think the current government has done something of that sort, is there was a huge focus on vocational training in the Gurukul system. So when I say vocational training, it was actually giving you real life skills when you're out there. Now imagine if you're trying to build a system from scratch, and if you remember, we had this conversation, what was the day before yesterday, we're literally living in a world where you're going to have 3D printers and you're going to have artificial intelligence. Maybe in 20 years, y'all will be in trouble. In 20 years, I am in India, we'll be in trouble. In 40 years, we're a little behind. We take time to catch up. So in that sense, imagine if you had a Gurukul-like system today for young kids, where the education is not designed in the old format where you go through the grind, you get the degree, and you're set for the rest of your life. We all know we're not set for the rest of our lives today. And if we could rejig something like a Gurukul system where, like the current education policy that the government has changed is very interesting, where let's say you go to college and you leave your degree for a while, and you can come back after a few years and you can pick up the same degree, or you can change your electives and you can actually do something else. That was just the reform done in India. Similarly, the government was trying to focus a lot on skill development, where we have to make people more employable. At the end of the day, if you want to win a civilization war, or if you want to bring back the good things of your civilization, you need money. And if you're not going to create people who are employable, because this current system definitely doesn't work. You just have zombies coming out of the education system. I'm sorry I have to use the word zombies, but because I was one of those zombies who came out. And I literally discovered my life after I went out of school. I literally started picking up philosophy books by myself as an interest. And I became what I am today out of sheer self-interest. My education system did not push me to do anything. And I'm speaking about the Indian education system. Yes, I did see some good things in the Canadian education system that was more hands-on, at least not in India. We don't have it. But if we would have used certain practices of the Gurukul, which were focusing on skill development for that point, so many projects which, let's say, Ravi wants to do, where you want to create a center where actual Indian history is done without any prejudices. It doesn't matter where it goes, right? We just want to know the truth. I mean, I was just telling you guys in India, right? In India, there is a debate as to what the truth is. I mean, we can't even figure out if Aurangzeb was good or bad. Let's once and for all, if we want to move ahead as a civilization, I don't know about you guys and your opinion, but I think India has not healed. We as a society, we need truth and reconciliation. We have not healed. And there are many things that this Gurukul system can actually give us in specific tangible ways, in the form of best practices, where there is vocational training, there is interpersonal relationship between the student and the teacher, which we call the Guru Shishya Parampara. I mean, how many people realize that it was not just that the Guru had to choose the Shishya, even the Shishya could reject the Guru. That's a very good practice. Like, if I find my math teacher boring, I should be in a position to tell my math teacher, hang on, you suck. But I'm not allowed in the current education system. I'm not allowed to say that. So why wouldn't that Gurukul practice be useful to us is something that I actually kind of wonder.
Raviji? Oh.
I picked up something quite poignant there on skill development. And it's something, I mean, speaking from historical perspective, people have this really romantic notion of Shivaji, Chhatrapati Shivaji, which is his full title. And they kind of leave out the state that he found Hinduism in. It was this idea of Gurukul, it was literally in pockets, compared to what it used to be, these well-developed systems, where a guru could go and visit another university, or, students could go and see other students. That was all gone. It was a case of, I know it rained on Tuesday, therefore I know in a week or so it will rain over there on a Thursday. It was that very basic, inference kind of understanding. And he gave Hindus a chance to revive themselves. And it's very important that just speaking strictly for Chhatrapati Shivaji, that for India, he is the best. As far as the military and accomplishments go, he is in a league of his own. But you would struggle to make the argument that he would be included in any global top 10. And I add the caveat that, and this is where education, Gurukul, comes to play a role, that he didn't do anything that you're not supposed to, like, you're supposed to have a navy, you're supposed to have an intelligence network, you're supposed to have these well-guarded forts, you're supposed to change your battle tactics when you meet a different kind of enemy. These are the stuff that you're supposed to do. And for Indians at the time, it was revolutionary, but for the world, it really wasn't. The effects of Napoleon are still being felt today. The effects of Genghis Khan, to a degree, are still being felt today. Outside of India, are the effects of Shivaji really being felt? Shivaji being felt. So this is where Gurukul is so vital, because it creates yes, you have natural leaders, but you also need to create them. And it gives us a fighting chance to do some R&D, do some innovation, all the tools, skill set, and the resources to go out there and compete on a global level. And the interesting thing about education was that the Maratha Empire was a mirror of the Mughal Empire, because they themselves, had no inference or reference to who to base it off of. So when they met a different kind of force, the British, the patchwork network of the Marathas fell apart because they met a single unified force. Now, there is an immense lesson to be learned from there. If we're talking about Hindus at a civilization level, there is a massive distinction between British Hindus, East African Hindus, and Indian Hindus, let alone everywhere else. Our problems are not the same. Our culture identities are different. What we can tolerate emotionally, spiritually, intellectually is different. And all these things need to come together. And I think having a global Gurukul system would go a long way to bridging some of these gaps and having a more meaningful conversation than we're currently having. If as someone who studied politics, you probably have heard this name before, but when you speak to Labour supporters and you ask them, it's okay, so why do Hindus support Labour? They'll give some spiel about, values and stuff. And I go, no, it's got nothing to do with that. It's got to do with one Gujarati lady from East Africa. And they're like, what? Yeah, if you know that, if you don't know who Jayaben Desai is, I suggest you go and look her up, because she was a lion. And this little Gujarati lady, through the 70s, built a patchwork of unions of different race, different color, different backgrounds, different economic backgrounds, and they all coalesced around her, which formed the foundation for the modern Labour Party. And it's because of her that Hindus, when they first came, who were very working class, coalesced and gathered around the Labour movement. And it's knowing those bits of history and knowing those little bits of things that are integral to that particular diaspora, that you can't simply take away. You can't just simply ask us to give up all this capital and history for, in my opinion, a below average journalist in India, or some nonsensical domestic thing in another country. So this is an important conversation, and a Gurukul would go a long way to addressing some of these issues that we have at a civilizational level. But without it, it's just me and Kushal talking to each other.
And I think that's key. It's actually, do we have this global or national framework, given that actually now we have our own histories? British Hindus have their own histories. East African Indians have their own histories. Gushar, you're married to a Canadian. You've got your kids and your family is going to have their own history with a different kind of bent. How do we then weave that together under some sort of framework that we can then still go forward and actually keep those sort of links and histories together? And I think it's super important. It sounds like Gurukul would be a great way to do it. You also picked up on something really interesting, and I think understanding the truth. Particularly in this postmodern, post-truth era, where we're all contending with facts, we're all contending with what's real, what's not, is what's been posted in a WhatsApp group, correct? We've got anti-vaxxers around and all the rest of it. We are living in a really complicated world where people don't know what to believe to be true. Again, do you think that system of learning, the sort of more holistic understanding around kind of exploring the truth is what Gurukul would give us, which, in a way can take away some of that confusion too?
Oh, definitely. This is something that is so close to my heart, because I am so vehemently opposed to postmodernism as an idea personally. Again, as a student of philosophy, I have never read something more absurd in my life than postmodernism, to be very honest. It's so absurd. It's like a word salad. It's a random word salad generator where, it's like you want to say something which sounds profound and means nothing actually. That's postmodernism. There you go. And again, it has nothing positive to offer. And unlike that, if we were taking another best practice of a Gurukul, one of the best practices in a Gurukul would be philosophy, because philosophy was taught. Philosophy is not taught in schools around the world in general. In my view, I don't remember. I think it was a couple of years ago. I had read a beautiful article where somebody had pitched the idea that from grade 9 or 10, or at worst grade 11, every child should be taught philosophy, because people don't realize, no matter how boring philosophy is, and I concede it is a boring journey when you read some of those philosophers, but it gives you so many tools. Now, imagine if there was a Gurukul and there is an attack from postmodernism, and you can reply by Anekantwad. Now, people might look at Anekantwad and for a moment might think that, hey, hang on, it sounds pretty much like postmodernism, but actually does it?
You might need to explain, if you could explain it a little bit for our listeners.
Sure. So Anekantwad is a system of, it's an epistemological tool provided by Jainism, in one of the 9 darshanas in India, or maybe Sikhism. So we have 10 darshans now. So Jainism basically had this school which was called, so how do we decipher the truth? Now, so they would have Syad Asti, Syad Nasti, Syad Asti Nasti, Syad Asti Cha, Syad Nasti Cha. So it's basically maybe yes, maybe no, maybe yes and no. And there were 7 epistemological tools where you look at a problem and you come up with a solution using those tools. But here's the catch. Unlike the postmodernists, Jainism never said that the truth is relative. There is an absolute truth. Even Jainism agreed on that. But when we look at it in reality, we need to be a little more flexible. We cannot be so rigid. And that is such a beautiful option in comparison to postmodernism. I mean, and if we had a system of education where these, again, I use the word best practices from within the Gurukul system, from within the Hindu philosophical pantheon, or not just Shyadpad, you could take the Buddhist Chatushkoti system. That is also a very interesting tool, epistemological tool. Imagine kids who are in maybe grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, they're in a moral philosophy class and they are given the trolley problem. Just think about it. You solve the trolley problem using Anekantwad. Why can't you do that? Why don't people think like that?
Yeah.
Now, I have, but I mean, I'm just one guy, but that's my whole point.
And it's true. And I think that brings us squarely to today. I think about our Western education system today, and, I've been through it, through a grammar school to Warwick. Personal anecdote, I wanted to study to look at the deontological versus a consequentialist view. One should do something because something's right because of one's duty versus something's right because of the consequences of your action. And I said to my philosophy professor, this is the Bhagavad Gita and I'd really like to do a comparison. And he said, well, I'm very sorry, we're a Western institution and we don't have the capacity to mark an essay like that. Now, how that when we think about all, the historical context for Raviji and the various attacks, I guess, on the way that we've developed our education, our civilization, the impact is being felt today, not only in the way that we haven't been able to learn about our colonial past, but also in the way that we can't actually use some of these amazing tools and today within the Western context. And how do we tackle that? What do we do to tackle that?
Well, first is a bit of a red herring because we can't use it, but everybody else can. Look at yoga; it's ours. It's created inherently Hindu, but
or chai tea lattes, golden chai tea lattes.
Yeah,
chai is
less said on that, the better. But let's take yoga for example. It's inherently Hindu. It can only have been made in India. The danger sign was Pilates, in my opinion. The moment someone came up with Pilates, I was like, well, hold on, you've just robbed about 100 asanas. The fact that now there is a Biya yoga, wine yoga, goat yoga, hot yoga, it flies in the face of what yoga actually is and does for a human being and for a soul. Again, I follow Samkhya, which is, relatively atheistic, but yoga is still a part of my civilizational heritage. Why is it that, it's controversial to say yoga is Hindu in authorship and ownership? We live in a day and age where so many people, especially in the business world, are fighting for intellectual property rights. It's you look at it through music. If someone samples a small drum beat, it sets off a chain of lawsuits. Well, hold on, you're pilfering and pillaging our entire civilization to your own end. If I had a Gurukul, we could arm up a team of lawyers and protect our intellectual property globally. But that requires a level of thinking that in my opinion, can only be gleaned from a historical perspective in conjunction with, almost like a train track with philosophical understanding as well. That this particular thing that we have is of value and, it should be defended. Now, people harp on about, the Kohinoor, but to me, that's not the most precious thing that's in there, in the crown jewels. Now, what comes as a shock to people is that the sword that Shivaji took his pratigya on for Swarajya is part of the crown jewels. And that in itself is so valuable to what it means to our civilization, or that, we have the right to self-determination. And here is a person in our history that not only sparked a evolution and revolution, but it was sustainable all the way until the British leaving. These are some of the challenges that we have. Now, I'm going to borrow from evolutionary biology for just a moment. And there's a theory that it posits, it's called the Red Queen theory, that it posits that in the animal kingdom, it never gets easier to survive. Now, you can survive a particular hunter or an apex predator, but it never gets easier. And if we apply that to us as a civilizational, it's not gotten any easier since the Islamic conquest of India. The challenge has changed. The hunter has changed. And therefore, we should be looking forwards, learning from the past and saying, okay, well, what do we need to stop this from happening? Now, my particular viewpoint is that Hinduism in the next 100 to 200 years is going to have to do something it's never done in its history, which is fight on a physical level, intellectual, spiritual, and emotional level, all at the same time. Now, a key component of the ability to do that is a Gurukul, where you're producing not only ideas and innovations, but people, and giving them not only the economic resources to live and thrive, but also the intellectual space to come up with ideas, come up with theories. Because, there's a question for Kushal, really and truly, because what have we ever done? Since the Vedanta, has Hinduism actually developed any new philosophies, new theories? Science and the things that we've learnt about the universe have moved on at such a pace. Have we kept up? Every so often I'll get a ping on Instagram about Hinduism and science. This is the thing where, this is a new thing in science, and it mentions it in this particular verse. I was
well, you did have the Kerala School of Mathematics, right? That was quite later on. So you had one tangible example there that was a significant contribution. I don't know, in philosophy, I guess, we had so many new versions, right? Even after Adi Shankara, even whether it's Vedanta. What happened was Vedanta captured, you had the Bhakti movement, I guess. You can say the Kabir Panthis were also there. Again, I'm a Gnostic, so obviously I don't agree with them at an intellectual level, but you've asked me a question, so I'm just telling you those were there. So I think you have a point. I always say, which is very interesting, I'm conducting these Ramayana lessons these days, and even when you read the Ramayana, it's very interesting that Ramayana is anything but otherworldly. It is so much about, you got to make money, man. It's like Ramayana tells you got to make money. You have to be very honest. You have to be ethical in your business dealings. There are so many examples there. And you have this airy-fairy attitude where I don't know how to put it, but the most annoying are those Indian uncles who say money isn't everything. Well, hang on. If money isn't everything, why do you have it? Then give it to me, right? I'll take it and I'll do something about it. The moment you say that to those Indian uncles and aunties, they'll be like, no, that's my money. But you just said money isn't everything. So give me some, maybe 20%. And they don't even give 2%. So there are just, I say in philosophy, these are fluffy things human beings say for the heck of it.
So I guess, in the context of this, I think what we're saying is, we've discussed a lot about the advantages of the Gurukul system, why we think it's important. We've talked a lot about the fact that actually we need history as a kind of the context to give us some lessons for the future. And then, actually we've talked a little bit about, what exactly can be done, but how do we do it today? So I know we're going to wrap up the discussion, but I'm going to open the question up to both of you. How do we practically bring this system into the modern context with all the things that we've talked about, the fact that potentially robots are going to actually end up replacing a lot of jobs going forwards. We need to think about the innovation of Indian thought and Hindu thought as well. So in that context, how do we make it practical? And then I'm going to close the discussion and I'll open it up to the students who've got some fantastic questions for you both.
Ravi, you want me to go first or you want to go?
Of course, please.
So I come from a perspective of India. So I think it's very important in life when you want to plan something like a Gurukul or a system where you're fundamentally changing the way people are going to think. The first thing you need to do is you make sure you make a lot of money. People don't realize that big changes, big thought needs money. So that's the first thing. Secondly, if you want to implement something like a Gurukul, I would say building it from scratch would be very, very tough. I would be thinking, I'm going to give you a business example. Let's say Coca-Cola tried to enter India and they realized that every Indian wants to have thumbs up. So what did Coca-Cola do? They bought thumbs up. And then today they're selling thumbs up. Hindus need to invest in systems that are running. They need to create a fund or something. That fund invests, and then you take that system and see, it's far easier to tweak something that has schools running, infrastructure running, everything is up in there. And you just have to tweak the curriculum here. You have to learn a bit over there rather than building something. Otherwise, it becomes like one of those Bollywood movies that never ends and everybody's singing and dancing around the trees and nothing really happens in the end.
Thank you, Kushalji. Raviji.
So, speaking honestly, you could you could have a Gurukul inside 9 months if you really wanted to. If you treat it as an after-school club on the weekends, where people, from our Samaj, who are experts in their fields, such as yourself in politics, people who are mathematicians, people who are scientists, giving up an hour, 2 hours a week to, just spend time with, kids and say, right, look, bring me your homework and let's have a conversation. That would be a good start. But speaking at a macro level, Kushal's right, you need to get the economics right of this. And I think we should take a page out of the church's book and start an investment fund, a global investment fund. If the Church of England is allowed a 7.4 billion portfolio, why aren't we? And it comes back to something that I said in the run up to this, which is, we shackle ourselves for absolutely no reason. We have these nonsensical shackles, and I don't understand why. If you look at the Islamic conquest of India, you find them attacking Mandis left, right, and center. And the kind of reason given is, it's where we kept our murtis. Yes, that is true, but it's also where we kept our money. Mandis used to act as banks, as insurance companies, as places of commerce where you could exchange ideas and get a loan, get some insurance out for your expedition to the next city over. Why can't Mandis do that again? Have an avenue to generate their own revenues and then invest it into the Samaj. If we all pulled our money together, £100 each, there's 200,000 Hindus, 200,000 Hindus. That's a lot of money we could pull together and stick it in an investment fund. If we needed to, fund a legal team or a R&D team anywhere in the world, we wouldn't ever have to worry about money ever again. That's something that you could do realistically, as it's been done before by everybody else. But for some reason, as Hindus, we choose to shackle ourselves, and it's a mystery.
And I think that's definitely food for thought for our listeners, who are all at some of the best universities in the country, all going on to have some fantastic jobs, and at some point, I'm sure, can contribute to this wealth fund that you've both suggested, actually. So I'm going to open it up to some questions, actually. So the first one is kind of based on what we've been talking about, and that's the kind of, how do we has this system been, the Gurukul system, been implemented anywhere else in the world that you both know of? And how would it work in the UK? I mean, certainly in the UK, my thoughts on this is that we actually have a very flexible way to education in the way that we can actually set schools up. And you would use something like a free school system, where essentially what you have is you have the government funding the school, and you can then set your own curriculum, and the same with academies, and you can actually set your own pay and conditions for staff. You can change the length of school terms. You can change things like admission policy. So all of that could actually be geared towards a Gurukul. But Kushalji, Raviji, do you know of any other examples across the world, or how would you do it? Certainly in India, actually, Kushalji, as well, if it's not been done anymore today.
Actually, in India, Swami Ramdev is opening up so many schools where he's adopting many best practices from Hindu philosophy. We've had Arya Samaj opening up schools all over in India. So actually, there are many schools in India that do adopt many of these practices. And the only thing is that beyond a point, if they take government funding, they have to kind of comply with certain government principles. And beyond that, yeah, you actually do have many of these schools. Why do you think after so many assaults on this civilization, even today, I told you, I mean, there are two histories taught in India, one what you're taught at home and one which you're taught at school. We keep fighting as Hindus. There's something happening in India that makes us keep running. Now, I'm usually, Ravi must be shocked today. Why is Kushal being so positive? But I mean, I have so many problems with many things in India, but I'm never going to give up. I see so many positive things. And am I saying that Swami Ramdev has the perfect answer? Hell no. I think, but he has a working model. We should take up something like that. I'm not saying for India. England can do that. You all have a lot of good things happening over there. It's workable. In fact, as a small baby step, Ravi is right. You can start with after school classes where you have I don't know, in America I've heard these things like Sunday school where kids go and learn Hindi or something like that. There are many things you can do, but I think at the end of the day, the drive has to come from the parents, not from the children.
I mean, historically, most civilizations have a teacher-student relationship. I think the closest one to Gurukul outside of India would probably be the Japanese dojo system, where a student would go and find a master, and not just in martial arts, but in various kind of other vocational skills as well, metallurgy, engineering, woodworking, so on and so forth. But I mean, in the global context, for me, it's about mindset. The Indian Hindu mindset. We used to have this kind of, especially through the early medieval phase, where if we're going to do something, we're going to make sure it's the best version that we can do it. People look at civil engineering works in India, especially ancient India, and other parts of phases through Indian history, and marvel at it. To which I simply ask, do you think they got it right the first time? There's a working process where they don't stop. We've got something, okay, how can we make it better? Where's the next innovation coming from? And if we want a Gurukul system, or any other kind of educational system, we need to bridge it with this mindset that we're not going to settle for anything but the best, and then merge it with a philosophical, educational philosophy rooted in Hinduism, where education for everyone. If whatever it is you want to do, we will help you be the best at it, at least until you're capable, as much as you're capable. And I think those two things need to be addressed initially at the outset, that, first we have the will to do this, and then everything else will fall into place, I think.
I just have to add one thing over here, that we have to be very careful when we approach and propose solutions. We cannot think like how the church functions. I think anything that is done in Hindu Samaj has to be sampradaya driven. So when I use the word sampradaya, I'm being very careful. I mean, it has to be like, say, ISKCON pushes this, or Arya Samaj pushes this. It has to be sampradaya driven. Let us face the facts. Hindus are not like Christians or Muslims. We have a different working culture. Mm-hmm. We don't have to be like them in everything. We can pitch to our own individual sampradayas, and that doesn't mean that if you're from one sampradaya, so other kid coming from another sampradaya is not going to be allowed in that school. They're going to be allowed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a case that, it's not because we should copy them, but if they have something that benefits them, then there's nothing stopping us from replicating a Hindu version for ourselves. It's going back to this idea that we have chosen to shackle ourselves on so many things that are completely nonsensical, given our historical knowledge and our philosophical viewpoints. Whether the church and Abrahamic faiths, their grand narrative, something Kushal alluded to earlier, is everyone should be like us. We want to dominate. Hindus have a grand narrative. It's world peace. We end all our mantras with Om Shanti Shanti for a reason. Now, the bit that's always left out is sometimes you have to fight for peace because not everybody has their interpretation of peace. And to what I'm saying is something that Shivaji's father alluded to, is that we are not in a position to challenge the Mughals just yet. They have far superior weaponry and they're far superior cavalry to us. Until we have like or better, we can't challenge them. To which I'm of the opinion that, okay, if that's what they've got, we're going to use everything that we have at our disposal to create something that's akin to that or more advantageous for us. And the simple reasoning is that we want to be here in 100 years, 1,000 years. We have just as much as a right to be. And everything that we stand for is unique in the world, and that's essentially it, but that requires a mindset change where we want to be the best and have the best.
Thank you for both, and thank you to Sumitji for that question too. So this next question is quite interesting, and it's really about sort of the historical, I guess, context, and it's from Adityaji, and he says, if the literature that was lost would still be present, would you say many aspects of current society would be different, and how so?
It's something that I think about quite a lot. It's like, what if the French had colonized India rather than the British? We'd have a few more Michelin-stars, and it's one of these counterfactual things where you can't calculate the impact of taking something out. Or adding something in, for that matter. It's all I can say is that it would have given us a better opportunity to handle certain situations throughout history. We would have had access to information that was lost for a long time, and therefore we would have made different decisions. So in business, you often form decision trees, or in statistics, you form decision trees, how one thing leads to another. In Hinduism, there's this huge gap of knowledge. As Kushal said, there's only a handful of Charaka texts left. How would his podcast be different if he had access to all of them? It's a mystery. I follow Samkhya. There's only a handful of Samkhya documents, and a lot of it we have to glean from other texts and kind of take it with a pinch of salt, as he said, and he's right. And that's just on a philosophical, theological level. If you look at historical decision making, again, one of the big kind of things is that, Hindus are not united. That's complete nonsense. Hindus have always been united. At any challenge, any existential threat, all the way from the first incursion of Islam to the British, Hindus have always presented a united front at the outset. But it's always because there was a cultural and a military doctrine difference, things fell apart. These things would have been easier to overcome should we had all of our knowledge available to us rather than just some of it.
Thank you. And actually, I've got a question directly for you, Kushalji. And actually, it was about the victim mentality you was talking about, which, something that you were saying that actually we should avoid. But Kushalji from Warwick Hindu Society asked, do you believe that the victim mentality you speak of contributes to a generation today that's been coined as the snowflake generation?
The snowflake mentality is slightly different. So in my view, the snowflake mentality stems from the fact that that's a unique thing to, those are first world problems. I live in India, we have real problems. So basically it all goes down to, when you reach a certain level of material prosperity in life, a lot of your problems basically go away. How do I know? Come with me to a slum in Mumbai and I will guarantee you will love your life so much. So it stems from that. So snowflakery is basically, I think, kids who have basically run out of real issues and they still want problems in your, it's an evolutionary reflex, right? You want to look at problems. So I guess snowflakery, and it's not I want to be a victim and that's why I'm a snowflake. It's just basically, I think what has happened in the Western society is that the old gods have died.
and human beings just cling on to new gods, and the new god gives you no redemption, and it kind of makes you weird. I don't know, this new god of victimhood or whatever you want to call it. So I think snowflakery is stemming directly from because you have faced so little adversity in life growing up. And I see this with rich kids in India too. There are similar snowflakes in India. Those are usually the rich kids, you know, who stay in South Bombay or South Delhi. Those are exactly like the kids in the West. So it's basically got to do with your financial status. So if you don't have real problems in life, maybe create some.
Thank you. Thank you, Kushalji. I was going to say, I think the new God is information without wisdom, actually. Too much information. But that's my take on it. So we've got a couple of questions here then. One is from Pravaji, and we have another one from Gajalji, and both of them are sort of talking about the fact that, you know, actually, if the modern system, you know, sorry, from Gevelji, so actually appreciating that our current system might take some time to change. What are the things that people can do right now to actually apply some of those lessons of Gurukul? So whether that's, you know, should there be more vocational training? And then actually, is there a way that youth can go about finding gurus that will help them develop and mold themselves? So actually taking some proactive choices rather than waiting for the education system to change.
Do you want to answer that first, Kushal? Do you want to go for it?
I'll go for it. Oh, it's a good question, first of all. I mean, I can share my own experience. Nobody told me what to do. I just picked up the damn book and started reading. So first of all, develop a habit of reading at least the primary text. So obviously we're answering, I'm assuming it's for Hindu kids. So whether you believe it or not, I'm a Charvak, but yes, read the Ramayana, read the Mahabharata, read maybe, you know, a few Hindu texts. And a lot of people think these things are complicated when in reality they're not. It needs a little bit of discipline. It's like I have the discipline of eating my breakfast daily. It's just you have to develop these habits. These are good habits you develop. So if you read, let's say 1 hour a day, or maybe 4 hours a week, I don't know how you manage to do that, and you pick a book, join a book club or something, you know, read with other people. When you read with other people, you have exchanges. When you have exchanges, you have anekantvad. That's a perfect example of anekantvad, where, you know, you have a single elephant, but 5 people with, who are blindfolded touch the same elephant, and they have different perspectives. So in this case, the scripture is the elephant, and we're reading the scripture together. Now, when I read a verse in the Ramayana, I might find misogyny in it. Somebody else might not find misogyny in it, and we hash it out. So if you want to, never wait for someone. The one thing I've noticed with a lot of Hindus is they like to outsource everything. You know, God today, as a disbeliever, and with due respects to people, God is like an outsourcing agent. At least in India, he's the outsourcing agent. You know, I go to the temple as like, Bhagwanji, please give me good grades. Outsource the problem to Bhagwanji. Bhagwanji, I need to get into this university. Again, outsourcing the problem to Bhagwanji. But Hindu philosophy says, don't outsource anything to Bhagwanji. Krishna's biggest lesson is what? कर्म कर, फल पे तेरा अधिकार नहीं है. इच्छा नहीं, इच्छा तो हर आदमी करता है. Everybody has the instinct and the desire. What Krishna says is that you got to do what you got to do without obsessing about the final result. You got to focus on your deed. So develop some good disciplined habits. Don't wait for that Hindu renaissance. Start reading your text. It has worked with me. Today I've been able to formulate a podcast where I talk about these things and people listen to me. I mean, I kept on doing it for 3 years. Initially, nobody cared. Now people care. And now things happen. So you got to be persistent. And that's a personality trait. It has nothing to do with Gurukul or no Gurukul. Gurukul or no Gurukul, if you have persistence, you can do it.
It's, again, a great question. And I could probably give about 10 different answers. But my perspective on the particular question from a historical view is you need a sense of urgency. And the best thing you can do is get involved, whether it's through NHSF, whether it's with your local mandir, and more importantly, stay involved. You never know when your expertise or when your time could make the difference between helping someone and helping the whole samaj. Now, I can give multiple examples of history where, you feel like, multiple reasons and multiple people that I've interacted with in our samaj where, you want to bash your head in because they're just completely ignoring everything that you're saying, or the warnings that you're giving or anything like that. And then you remember the person that really sticks out is Chhatrapati Sambhaji, which is Shivaji's son. If you read about his life and how it ended, you can't afford a day off. He was blinded, had his tongue ripped out, had his skin peeled off, his cut up. And even in that state, when Aurangzeb, says convert to Islam, he has enough temerity and brilliance and thought of mind to say, you could give me your daughters and I still wouldn't. That kind of energy and that kind of pride that it instills in you, it gives you the motivation to keep going when all hope is lost and when you think that the things will never change. And something that as British Hindus that we run into all the time is people won't let go of their chairs or their positions in organizations, and that requires persistence. So as Kushal said, yes, pick up a book, read, educate yourself. You have more information at your fingertips now than we have ever had. And on top of that, there are more Hindus alive than there have ever been in Hindu history. So, chances are you will find someone that thinks like you, feels the same way about you, and then you will form groups and change will come. But you've got to be in the game in order to win it. And I think if you read history in conjunction with philosophy, it will give you this comprehensive kind of viewpoint and perspective that will not only help you problem solve, but stay in the game long enough to make a difference.
Thank you, Raviji. And I think that actually is a lovely message to actually bring the Q&A to a close. I can't believe the time's flown so quickly. We've spoken today about, the importance of the Gurukul system and actually explored, not necessarily looking at just the modern day context, but actually how it worked in the past, for good or bad, how we can take some of that and bring it into the future. And in particular, in a way, the fact that there is this sense of urgency and that we do have the volition to be able to go away and do this. There are existing models that we can use, whether it's, the stuff that's happening in India today, using that in the UK with some of our existing legislative and other frameworks to apply some of the lessons that we've learned over the years. And then actually, in terms of the type of people we want in society and the types of challenges that we've got coming up, the Gurukul system is something that promotes a personality-based view of kind of education, looks at skill development beyond just your kind of literacy and numeracy, but actually into your vocational space. It's much more holistic. Gives you a way to actually think critically about the world around you. And so, it's been wonderful to hear both your views. And I'd like to just invite you both to just give us some closing remarks before we finish the discussion today. So Raviji, I'll start with you and then we'll go to Kushalji.
I'm going to keep it short. I'll end with a quote, but what I will say about particular history is it's not about just reciting facts, figures, remembering key dates. It's about actually what critical analysis, what thinking, what psychology, all pulling as much information out of the past events as you can. The way I choose to see it is our ancestors went through some terrible things and did some amazing things. They shouldn't be forgotten. And we should, use that as a launch pad to go on to bigger and better things. And fundamentally, we have to want that for ourselves. And the quote that I really want to kind of share with everyone is from Chancellor William, who was a Black African sociologist, anthropologist. And in his book, Destruction of a Black Civilization, he opens with a quote from a Sumerian legend where he states that, "What became of the Black people of Sumer? The traveler asked the old man. For ancient records show that the people of Sumer were black. What happened to them? Ah, said the old man, who sighed. They lost their history, so they died. Our ancestors did some amazing things and did some terrible things and made mistakes and did above and beyond anybody could ask of them in certain instances. I don't want to forget them, and I certainly want to do for them and as much as I can with the time allotted to me. And I think if we want to be going forward, then we should go with a sense of urgency, given the past experiences, but also with a positive attitude that we are still in this, more so than anybody who we have interacted with throughout history. If we look at the Abrahamic faiths, we met all their ancestors and we're still here. So we should take that with a sense of pride and saying that we will be here and we have something to offer.
Well, first of all, I want to say thanks a lot to you guys for for this wonderful discussion. It was a lot of fun. It's always fun to talk to students, actually. How do I end this? I think Ravi has done a great job. So I'll just say this: if any young person or anybody, it doesn't matter if you're watching it, if you're a Hindu, stay connected to India. I know people don't realize that you cannot build a Hindu civilization without India in your mind. Stay connected to the real motherland. Yeah, it is the real motherland. I mean, we have many problems in India. Trust me, I stay here. I know that. But until you don't stay connected to the mothership, you're not going to get the fruits of the labor. Second, make tons of money. Believe me, I live in a country and I live in a society which is a society of scarcity. You live in a country and a society that is a society of abundance. So you have lost the scarcity mindset. I have that scarcity mindset. I wake up every day thinking everything's going to go. Y'all wake up everything thinking, what am I supposed to outrage about? You've run out of things to outrage. So my only advice would be, you really you care for your civilization. That's the way you can contribute to your civilization. Make tons of money, read books, just give 4 hours a week. That's all. And stay in touch with the motherland. That's the most important aspect. The more you stay in touch with the motherland, I know it's dirty when you come here. I know it's polluted. I know all of that. I live here again. But stay connected. And once you develop that connect, you will see, especially, you guys stay in England. I mean, American kids, the time zones really don't match. And especially British Hindus actually have that advantage. So if you could do that, I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much indeed, Kushalji, Raviji, for your incredibly incisive thoughts on the topic, your incredibly depth of knowledge, both on the philosophical front and the historical front, brought the whole conversation to life in terms of the anecdotes and the stories that you were able to share with us all today. If we go back to the central question here, actually, is the future of learning in his past? I think that after this discussion, I'd say yes, absolutely there is. And I think, actually this is more of a call to action to people that are listening, that there is something that you can do, whether that's pick up a book, whether that's connect back to India, whether that's, to go and get a great job and earn some money so you can invest in things like this going forwards. So I want to thank you all very much indeed for being part of this today. Namaste.
Thank you, Mayuri-ji and Kushalji and Ravi-ji. It's been absolutely incredible hearing your discussion and your opinions and perspectives that you have to offer. I've certainly learned a lot this evening, and I'm sure you all have too. It's been so interesting to hear all the different perspectives. And I guess the beauty of these discussions is that we start somewhere and go on a journey that ties in so many different aspects we may not always think about. So my biggest takeaway from today is to go back and read. Don't wait for the change to happen, but to be that change you want to see. And I hope, as our audience today, you've all have your own takeaways from today. We hope that this discussion's answered a lot of your questions, but like I said in the beginning, our aim was to leave you with more. So make sure you take those vichars back to your family and friends and have your own Manthan. Again, thank you Mayuriji, Kushalji, Raviji for taking the time to be a part of this discussion. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here on our platform to discuss such a vast topic. I would also like to extend a big thank you to the organizing team, for this evening would not have been a success without you guys. And finally, my biggest thank you goes out to you, our audience. Now, if this discussion was right up your street, make sure you check out Vichaar Manthan's discussion coming Saturday at 7 p.m. on the topic of, does Sanskrit literature play a role in our future? So make sure you check that out on their website. And as NHSF, we always have a range of events happening throughout the year. However, unfortunately, due to COVID-19, we have not been able to do in-person events, but that's not stopped us from going virtual. Next up on our timeline, we have our Elevate Challenge. We usually have a national sports competition, but Elevate is our new initiative to bring our students together in activities such as walking, meditation, and yogasan too. So please make sure to check that out as it's launching in mid-January. We don't stop there. We're also in the process of recruiting. So if you'd like to get involved with our national committee, do check us out on our website. There's so many opportunities to join us. Firstly, you'll be joining a big parivar. We're so happy, you make memories and friends, and you get to work on projects such as VMC. And most importantly, you'll be driving forward the largest Hindu student organization outside of India. And last but not least, we are celebrating our 30th anniversary next year. So look forward to zonal and national events in the next few months. Please do have a look at our respective websites for more information about both NHSF UK and Vichaar Manthan. Do follow us on social media. We're present on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter for future events. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting this event, and I hope you all have a good evening. Namaste, Dhanyavad.